is there a truly reality out there that humans can really know? It's an age-old battle between realists and absolutists. God is not great, how religion ruins everything. And yet it's utterly and totally ridiculous. We need to live for something beyond ourselves. Years ago, the famous German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche railed against what has often been called the Judeo-Christian tradition. And that's basically the moral code that has accompanied Judaism and Christianity, and to one degree or another has impacted the West. Smash, he declared, smash those old law tablets. After all, his thinking, what could something, for instance, like the Ten Commandments, something so old and something coming from such a small nation in the ancient Near East, what worth does something like that have for people today? Well, let me tell you what I think it does, the worth it is. You know, we all live in relationships. We all live in various relationships with each other. And how often are those relationships impacted, either for good or for bad, by the moral conduct, by the conduct and the morals that we have in those relationships? Who hasn't had a relationship ruined by the lack of morals or the moral attitude of someone? I mean, tell me about a woman whose husband has no moral qualms about beating her. Tell me if she doesn't think morals are important. Tell me about a child who suffers from parents who abuse him. Tell me that child doesn't think morals are important. Tell me about a family who's destroyed because one of the parents commits adultery. Tell me that family doesn't think morals are important. I could go on and on and on and on and on. Ask somebody whose house was burglarized and the sense of violation they feel if they don't think morals are important. I mean, morals are the very fabric that hold our society together, even more than laws do. Laws, in fact, simply reflect the morals of the society. And this is a very important point that people often miss. Laws don't arise in a vacuum. The law of a society, pretty much the laws reflect the morals of that society. You know, remember, before the Holocaust, you know, the Nazis came out with all these horrible racial laws. I mean, Jews weren't even allowed to own animals. They weren't allowed to own, you know, Aryan pets or some kind of nonsense like that. The laws reflected the morals of the society. And then who today, at least I know in America, doesn't cringe at what they called the Jim Crow laws. These were laws that legalized the separation of the white and black races in the southern part of America. It was all legal because they were the laws, and the laws reflected the moral values of the time. Yes, I think morals are very, very important. Sure, we all know cultural existence exists, and that some moral values reflect different cultures and so on, but so what? You know, amid all the horrible stories coming out of Iraq, the Iraq War, one of the things that has been tragic are these stories. Some of these times they kidnap people, and they kidnap these young girls, and the family pay the ransom. The family pay the ransom and get the girl back, and yet after they brought the girl back, what'd they do? They stoned the girl. They killed the girl because they felt she brought shame or dishonor on their family. In Afghanistan a while back, a woman was gang raped. Well, she goes to the police and all that, and in the end, the woman was put to death because she somehow was considered dishonored. Now, tell me that's not wrong, and I don't care, horrified, you know, you feel horrified about it, whatever. Tell me that's not wrong. And I don't care about what you say, the culture or the traditions. You know, we're horrified. Even we in the West, we've been horrified and shocked by the practice of female circumcision. I mean, these women are mutilated. And we're horrified, whether by honor killings, by what goes on in Afghanistan, by this. But aren't we being judgmental? Are we not taking our cultural norms and applying them to folks who have different cultural norms? How dare we in the West, we be indignant about honor killings? How dare we in the West, we be indignant about female circumcision? Who are we to judge these people in Afghanistan? A woman gets raped, their culture, they think she deserved it or whatever, and they stone her. That's what goes on when you're moral. See, so my point is, I don't think that in the end, we are all true moral relatives. We believe in it to a point, and then after a certain point, we say no, no, no. But see, then the question arises, where then do moral values come from? Why are we, if we're not going to say, well, okay, in that culture it's okay for if a girl's kidnapped and she comes back and they kill her because she brought dishonor, if we're not willing to say that's okay, then we have to think if there's some higher moral code. If we're not going to just say, well, it's society does it, it's their culture, then that's fine. If we're not going to do that, then where do we get it from? You know, there are two options. Either humans make up morals or the society, or they come from God. They come from something transcendent. You know, the French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, who's a pretty hardcore atheist, if there ever was one, he said something like this. He said, it's very distressing that God does not exist because all possibility of finding values in a heaven of ideas disappear along with him. There can no longer be an a priori good since there is no infinite and perfect consciousness to think of it. Translate what he's saying. He's saying there is no God. There is no God, so there's no moral transcendence, so there is no a priori good, so ultimately that leaves human beings to come up with their own version of morality. And if that's true, then, if we believe moral values are purely human concoctions, purely coming out of our culture, I mean, it's no different than moral values are like maybe you like cakewalk jazz, or maybe you like abstract expressionism, or maybe you like, you know, bongo drum music or whatever. All these human creations. I mean, what gives us, if that's what morals are like, what gives us the right to rail against female circumcision or honor killings? I mean, if a culture feels that a woman who had been kidnapped and had been sexually violated and brings dishonor on her family, and the only way to get rid of that shame is to kill that woman, how dare we stand in judgment upon that? How dare we in the West look up our noses and say, well, that's horrible, that's wrong? How can we do that? I don't think we can. If morals are a purely human creation, what standard do we have to judge a moral system, that one moral system is better than another one? Where does that standard come from? If it's not a purely human creation, as arbitrary as choosing what side of the road to drive on or what color your national flag should be, if it's not one of those, then where else does it come from? Maybe most of us aren't going to be comfortable with this, though. I don't care how culturally relative you think morals are. I don't care how tolerant you are and how non-judgmental you are or you want to be of other societies, of other cultures. I don't care, you know, you realize, all right, your culture's got their values and someone else in their culture has their values. I don't know. I still would guess that every last person listening to this would be shocked at this idea of honor killings. So then ultimately, where does it come from? Again, if it doesn't come from culture, if it's something, if we're not going to leave it to culture, then it has to come from something above culture. Taking a young girl who has been kidnapped and held for ransom and then having her killed, you know, in order to restore honor is wrong, period. I don't care what the culture says. And if it's wrong, and if you believe it's wrong and you're not being a hypocrite, then where do you get this sense of it being wrong other than if it comes from something transcendent, something greater than human culture? And where else would that be but perhaps some kind of God or some kind of transcendence? It's, anyway, something to think about.